All right, so get ready to dive into a topic that's, well, let's just say it's not the most glamorous, but it's absolutely crucial. We're talking about sanitation.
Oh, yeah. And when we say sanitation, we're not just talking about, having a clean bathroom. This is about something much bigger, something that impacts billions of people around the world.
You got that right.
Mm.
Our deep dive today is all about what the UN calls safely managed sanitation. And believe it or not, a staggering 3.4 billion people, that's 2 out of every 5 people on this planet, don't have it.
That's a huge GE number. And it's not just about inconvenience or discomfort. We're talking about serious health risks, even life or death situations for millions of people.
Yeah, the consequences of inadequate sanitation can be devastating. Our sources point to some really grim statistics. 1.4 million preventable deaths each year, primarily from diarrheal diseases.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? Just imagine if that were happening in our own backyard, if our families and communities were facing those kinds of risks.
It's hard to even fathom. So let's break this down. What exactly does safely managed sanitation actually mean? Is it just about building more toilets?
Well, toilets are definitely a part of it, but it's so much more than that. It's about having a system in place where human waste is completely separated from people and the environment throughout its entire life cycle.
Okay, so it's not just about where we go to the bathroom. It's about what happens to the waste afterwards.
You got it. We're talking about containment, treatment, and disposal. Every step of the way has to be managed safely and effectively to protect public health and the environment.
It sounds pretty complex.
It is, and if any part of that system breaks down, the consequences can be pretty severe.
That makes sense. Our sources point out that even improving sanitation to like a slightly better level doesn't really make a huge difference in public health. You need the whole system, like the whole chain, to be strong.
Exactly. It's like trying to fix a leaky pipe with a Band-Aid. You need a complete overhaul of the system to really solve the problem.
Okay, so what are the key elements of a functioning sanitation system? I know our sources broke it down into what they called pillars of safely managed sanitation. What's the first pillar we need to understand?
Well, it all starts with policies and regulations. You need clear rules of the game at both the national and local levels to ensure that sanitation services are delivered safely and sustainably.
So it's kind of like having a blueprint for how things should work.
Exactly. We need clear standards for things like water quality, worker safety, and environmental protection. We also need mechanisms to ensure those standards are actually enforced.
I guess that makes sense. If you don't have a solid foundation of rules and guidelines, things can get pretty messy, literally. But sometimes policies can be, like, slow and bureaucratic. How do we make sure they actually translate into action on the ground?
That's where strong leadership and enforcement come in. We need governments that are committed to making sanitation a priority and hold service providers accountable for meeting those standards.
Okay, so it's not just about writing rules. It's about making sure those rules are actually followed.
Exactly. And it's not just about what's happening right now either. We also need to be thinking about the future. That's where climate resilience becomes crucial.
Climate resilience. Okay, help me connect the dots here. What does climate change have to do with sanitation?
You might be surprised to learn how intertwined they are. Climate change is already disrupting sanitation systems in various ways.
Really? Like how?
Well, for example, in areas that are prone to drought, water scarcity can make it difficult to maintain sanitation facilities, leading to unsanitary conditions.
So if there's not enough water to flush toilets or clean things properly, that can create a breeding ground for disease.
Exactly. And on the flip side, in areas vulnerable to flooding, heavy rainfall can overwhelm sanitation systems, causing overflows and contaminating water sources.
Wow, so it's like a double whammy. Climate change is making the sanitation challenge more difficult and increasing the risks of disease outbreaks.
Exactly. And here's a twist: you might not expect sanitation systems themselves contribute to climate change.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that.
The treatment and disposal of waste can generate significant greenhouse gas emissions, which contribute to the warming of the planet.
Wow, so it's a vicious cycle. Sanitation systems contribute to climate change, and climate change undermines sanitation systems. We need to find ways to break that cycle.
Absolutely. We need to design systems that are both resilient to the impacts of climate change and minimize their own environmental footprint.
So we need systems that can withstand those extreme weather events, but that are also eco-friendly in their own right. That's a tall order.
It is, and it requires us to be really innovative and forward-thinking in our approach. And to make smart decisions, we need another critical element: data and monitoring.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Data. So is this about keeping track of how many toilets are built or something like that?
It's much more than that. We need robust data systems to understand the entire flow of waste, from its source to its final destination. We need to identify risks, track progress, and allocate resources effectively.
Okay, so it's like having a map of the sanitation system so you can see where the problems are and where the opportunities for improvement lie.
Exactly. Think of it as a GPS for sanitation. It helps us navigate towards a more sustainable future.
I like that analogy. But I imagine collecting that data, especially in places where sanitation systems are less developed, must be a huge challenge.
It absolutely is. There are significant data gaps, particularly in informal settlements and rural areas. We need to find creative ways to gather information, including on-site inspections, community surveys, and even, and I love this term, shit flow diagrams.
Shift flow diagrams. Okay, you've definitely got my attention now. What are those?
It's exactly what it sounds like, tracking the journey of human waste from the moment it leaves the body to its final destination. It helps us identify bottlenecks, risks, and opportunities for intervention.
So it's like a detective story. But for poop, we need to follow the evidence to see where the system is breaking down and how we can fix it. But I gotta say, all of this sounds pretty expensive.
You're right, which brings us to another key pillar. Financing and affordability. Building and maintaining these systems require significant investment, and we need to find ways to make them accessible to everyone, regardless of their income level.
So who pays for all of this? Is it primarily a government responsibility, or does the private sector have a role to play?
It's a shared responsibility. Public funding is essential, of course, but we also need to explore innovative financing mechanisms that leverage private sector investment.
So we need a mix of public and private funding to really make this work. But how do we get the private sector on board? They're all about profit, right?
Well, a well-regulated sanitation sector can actually be quite attractive to businesses. There are opportunities for profit, but also for innovation and social impact.
So it's not just about making money. It's about making a difference. And that makes sense. If there's a clear regulatory framework and a potential for profit, businesses are more likely to jump in and contribute to solutions.
Exactly. And we need those innovative solutions because the challenges are complex and multifaceted.
So we've talked about policies, climate resilience, data, and financing. What else do we need to consider?
Well, there's one more pillar that's often overlooked but absolutely crucial: human resources.
Ah, yes, the people who actually make it all happen.
Exactly. You can have the best technology and infrastructure in the world, but without a skilled and dedicated workforce, it won't function properly.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in the technical aspects, but in the end, it's people who design, build, operate, and maintain these systems. They're the ones who make it all work.
Absolutely. And that's why investing in training, education, and professional development for sanitation workers is so crucial.
It's like any other profession, right? You need skilled and knowledgeable people to do the job effectively.
Exactly. And we need to ensure that these essential workers have the skills, knowledge, and support they need to do their jobs effectively and safely.
So it's not just about building toilets and treatment plants. It's about building a skilled workforce that can sustain those systems for the long haul.
Exactly. And it's about valuing and respecting those who work in this sector. Sanitation is essential for public health and a fundamental human right, and the people who provide these services deserve recognition and support.
I completely agree. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the shocking scale of the problem, the need for a holistic approach, and the key pillars of a functioning sanitation system. But before we dive deeper, let's take a step back and connect this to you, the listener. Why should you care about safely managed sanitation?
It's easy to think of this as someone else's problem, especially if we have access to those services ourselves. But the reality is that it affects all of us, directly or indirectly. Think about the products you buy, the food you eat, the water you drink. All of these things are connected to sanitation in some way.
That's a good point. Even if our own sanitation systems are top-notch, the health and well-being of billions of people around the world depend on progress in this area. It's a global issue with very real local impacts. So where do we go from here? What can be done to address this massive challenge?
Well, that's where things start to get really interesting. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore some of the innovative solutions and technologies that are emerging in the field of safely managed sanitation. We'll talk about everything from water-efficient toilets and advanced wastewater treatment systems to circular sanitation models that turn waste into valuable resources. Get ready for some inspiring and unexpected ideas. It's interesting. We often focus on the big picture, the technology, the infrastructure, but we sometimes forget about the most important element of all,
And it is.
people, the human element.
Yeah.
We talked about the need for a skilled workforce, and I think it's worth really digging into that a bit more.
Yeah, you're right. It's easy to get caught up in all the tech and forget that without the right people in place, none of it actually matters.
Mm,
And, our sources really hammered home that the point human resources are essential for achieving safely managed sanitation.
absolutely. Think about it. You need skilled engineers to design these sanitation systems, you need dedicated construction workers to build them, and you need trained technicians to operate and maintain them. And let's not forget the folks on the front lines, the sanitation workers collecting and processing waste every single day. They're the unsung heroes, really.
Totally. They're the ones dealing with the not so pleasant stuff.
Yeah.
And yet their role is so often undervalued, even overlooked. One thing our sources highlighted was this concerning shortage of skilled sanitation workers in many parts of the world. What's driving that shortage?
Well, it's a pretty complex issue, actually. In some cases, it boils down to a lack of training and education opportunities. In other cases, it's more about the perception of sanitation work as, I don't know, undesirable, maybe even dangerous. We need to challenge those perceptions and create a more positive image of this profession. It's vital work.
So it's not just about getting people trained. It's about changing how we view sanitation work altogether. Makes sense. But how do you actually go about changing those perceptions, making it a more appealing career path?
Well, for starters, you got to make sure sanitation workers are paid fairly and have safe working conditions. That's a no-brainer, right? Then, investing in professional development programs, giving them opportunities to advance in their careers, that's huge too. When people see sanitation as a viable, respected career path, well, naturally, more talent is going to be drawn to the field.
Right, it's about creating a system that supports and empowers sanitation workers, makes them feel valued for the essential work they do.
Bro.
But it's not just about the quantity of workers, right? It's also about the quality of their training. What kind of skills do they need to be truly effective?
It depends on their specific role, of course,
Yeah.
but generally speaking, sanitation workers need a good understanding of basic sanitation principles, hygiene practices, safety procedures, all that good stuff. They also need to be able to operate and maintain equipment, troubleshoot problems, and, communicate effectively with the communities they serve.
It's like any skilled trade, really. You need a solid foundation and practical experience to excel. And speaking of communities, I think it's important to remember that safely managed sanitation isn't just a technical problem to solve. There's a social and cultural dimension to it as well.
Oh, absolutely. Community engagement is key why. You can't just swoop in with some fancy new technology and expect it to work. You got to involve communities in every step of the process: planning, design, implementation. Make sure those sanitation systems actually meet their specific needs and cultural preferences.
It's up ownership, right? If people feel like they've had a say in how things are done, they're much more likely to buy in, use the systems properly, and keep them running smoothly.
Exactly. It's about building trust and collaboration between communities and sanitation professionals, working together as partners to create solutions that are both effective and indeed sustainable. And that brings us to another crucial aspect: gender. Traditionally, sanitation work has been viewed as a man's job, but that's starting to change, thankfully.
Yeah, for sure. I've definitely noticed more women entering the sanitation workforce. Why is that important? What difference does it make?
Well, for one thing, it brings a wider range of perspectives and experiences to the table. Women often have different insights into sanitation challenges, especially when it comes to hygiene and menstrual health, things that might not always be considered in a male-dominated field.
That's a great point. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it makes perfect sense. The more diverse the workforce, the more innovative and effective the solutions are likely to be.
Absolutely. And it's not just about gender diversity either. We need people from different backgrounds, cultures, and disciplines working together to tackle this complex challenge. The more diverse our perspectives are, the better equipped we'll be to find solutions that work for everyone, solutions that are truly equitable and inclusive.
Couldn't agree more. Diversity is key to solving any complex problem, and sanitation is no exception. So, to recap, we've talked about the importance of a skilled and dedicated workforce, the need to change how we view sanitation work, the critical role of community engagement, and the power of diversity. But there's one more element we need to address: the connection between sanitation and climate change.
Right. We touched on that earlier, but I think it deserves a deeper dive. We talked about how climate change can disrupt sanitation systems.
Yeah, like how droughts can lead to water scarcity, making it harder to keep things clean, and floods can overwhelm systems, causing contamination.
Exactly. But it goes beyond that. It's not just about the impact of climate change on sanitation, but also the impact of sanitation on climate change. Remember how we talked about the greenhouse gas emissions from treating and disposing of waste?
Right. So we've got this vicious cycle going on. Sanitation systems contribute to climate change, and then climate change makes those sanitation challenges even worse.
Precisely. So it's not enough to just build any sanitation system. We need to design systems that are both climate resilient and climate friendly. That means investing in technologies that reduce water consumption, minimize energy use, and capture or treat greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, so give us some examples. What kind of technologies are making a difference in this area?
Well, one area that's seen a lot of innovation is water-efficient toilets. Traditional toilets use a ton of water to flush waste, but new designs are using way less water or even no water at all.
No water. How does that even work?
There are composting toilets that use natural processes to break down waste into fertilizer, and then there are waterless toilets that use vacuum systems to remove waste. Pretty cool stuff.
That as is cool.
Yeah.
So you're not just conserving water, you're actually turning waste into a valuable resource. Love that.
It's a win-win, right? And these innovations aren't limited to toilets either. There's some really interesting stuff happening in wastewater treatment systems as well.
You mean those giant plants that treat sewage?
Yep, those are the ones. Traditional treatment plants can be real energy hogs, and they often release harmful pollutants into the environment. But thankfully, new technologies are making them much more efficient and sustainable.
Like what? Spill the beans.
One super interesting area is anaerobic digestion. It's a process that uses microorganisms to break down organic waste in the absence of oxygen.
Anaerobic digestion. Okay, so no oxygen involved. What's the benefit of that?
Well, this process produces biogas as a byproduct. And get this, that biogas can be used to generate electricity or heat.
Wait, so we're talking about turning sewage into energy.
You got it. It's a fantastic example of how we can move toward a more sustainable future by transforming what we typically consider waste into a valuable resource. It's like a sanitation superpower.
Seriously, that's amazing. It seems like we're moving towards this whole circular economy approach, where nothing is truly wasted.
Exactly. It's about seeing the potential in what we often discard. And this resource recovery mindset extends to sanitation as well. Have you heard of circular sanitation models?
Yeah, our sources mentioned those briefly. It sounded like a really interesting concept, but I didn't quite grasp how it works.
Well, circular sanitation is all about closing the loop on nutrients. Instead of treating human waste as something to be disposed of, we can recover those valuable resources like nitrogen and phosphorus and use them as fertilizer.
Ah, so instead of flushing everything away, we're capturing those nutrients and putting them back into the system to help grow food.
Precisely. It's like mimicking nature, where waste from one organism becomes food for another. It's a much more sustainable approach than simply flushing everything away and losing those valuable nutrients.
I love that idea. It's so elegant, so in tune with how nature works. But how do we actually put these circular models into practice?
Well, there are various approaches. One example is urine diversion toilets. They separate urine from feces, and since urine is rich in nitrogen and phosphorus, it can be treated and used as fertilizer. Another example is composting toilets, which we mentioned earlier. The compost produced can be used to enrich soil and grow food.
So we're not just solving the sanitation crisis, we're creating a more sustainable and resilient food system in the process.
Exactly. It's all about interconnectedness. But I know what you're thinking. Are these innovative solutions actually affordable, especially in developing countries where the need is greatest?
You read my mind. New technology can be expensive, especially when you're talking about implementing it on a large scale.
You're absolutely right. But there are ways to make it more affordable. For example, we can explore those innovative financing mechanisms we talked about earlier, things like microloans or pay-as-you-go models. We can also promote local manufacturing and capacity building to reduce costs and create jobs.
It's about finding ways to make this technology accessible and sustainable in the long run. But it's not just about the money, right? It's also about having the right policies and regulations in place to support innovation.
Absolutely. Governments need to create an enabling environment for sanitation entrepreneurs and businesses to thrive. That means clear regulatory frameworks, incentives for innovation, and investment in research and development.
So it's about fostering a culture of innovation, a space where governments, businesses, and communities can work together.
Exactly. But even with the coolest tech and the most supportive policies, we still need passionate individuals who are dedicated to driving change. What can individuals do to make a difference in this space?
Yeah, what can the average person do? I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed by these global issues, like they're too big to tackle.
I get that, but it's important to remember that every action, no matter how small, can make a difference. For starters, we can raise awareness. Talk to your friends, family, and colleagues about the importance of safely managed sanitation. Share information on social media. Support organizations working in this field.
It's about getting people talking, making this a mainstream issue that everyone cares about.
Exactly. And we can also vote with our wallets. Support businesses that are committed to sustainable sanitation practices. Choose products that are water efficient and environmentally friendly. These little choices, when multiplied by millions of people, can really make a difference.
So it's about using our consumer power to drive change.
Oh.
And let's not forget the power of political action. We can contact our elected officials and let them know that sanitation is a priority for us.
Absolutely. We need to hold our leaders accountable for ensuring that everyone has access to this fundamental human right. Every voice matters.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges, the solutions, and the role that each of us can play. But before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I'm curious, what do you think is the single most important takeaway for our listeners? If they only remember one thing from all of this, what should it be?
That's a great question. I think the most important takeaway is that safely managed sanitation is everyone's business. It's not just a problem for governments or NGOs to solve. We all have a role to play. It's about recognizing that our individual actions, no matter how small they may seem, can collectively make a huge difference.
It's about shifting the narrative, right?
Yeah.
Making sanitation a topic that people are comfortable talking about, advocating for. But it often feels like this issue gets swept under the rug,
Mm.
It's not exactly a glamorous topic, and it can be, kind of uncomfortable to discuss.
You're right. There's definitely a taboo around sanitation. People see it as something dirty, something embarrassing to talk about. But it's a natural human function, and managing it safely is essential for all of us. We need to break that taboo and start talking about sanitation openly and honestly.
I'm with you there. Let's normalize the conversation, bring sanitation out of the shadows, and make it a mainstream issue.
Exactly. And it's important to emphasize the connection between sanitation and these other global challenges we're facing, like poverty, inequality, and climate change. Safely managed sanitation is a key driver of sustainable development. When people have access to proper sanitation, it has a ripple effect. It improves health, education, and economic opportunities.
It's about creating a more just and equitable world for everyone, not just providing toilets.
Absolutely. And it's about understanding that we're all interconnected. The health and well-being of one community affects us all.
I think that's a really powerful message. We've covered so much ground today, the challenges, the innovative solutions, and the role that each of us can play in driving change. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. This isn't just about technical solutions or policy changes. It's about a fundamental shift in our mindset.
I couldn't agree more. It's about recognizing that sanitation is not just a basic human need, it's a human right. It's about dignity, respect, and the opportunity to live a healthy, fulfilling life.
Beautifully said. So for all of you listening out there, I challenge you to think about how you can contribute to this movement for safely managed sanitation. Every action, no matter how small, can make a difference.
And remember, this isn't a hopeless situation. We have the knowledge, the technology, and the resources to solve this crisis. It's just a matter of mobilizing our collective will and taking action.
Okay, so we've dug into the challenges, talked about the human side of things, but now let's get to the fun part. What about solutions? I mean, our sources pointed to some really cool innovations happening in sanitation.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty exciting time for this field. You're seeing a lot of creativity and ingenuity, people really tackling this global challenge head on.
You mentioned those water-efficient toilets earlier. I've heard of composting toilets, but what else is out there? What other innovations are people coming up with?
Oh, there's a whole range of water-saving technologies. We've got toilets that use a fraction of the water of traditional ones, and even some that, get this, use no water at all.
Wait, no water? Seriously, how does that even work?
Well, some of them use vacuum systems, so they just kind of suck the waste away. Others rely on these biological processes to break down the waste, turning it into compost. It's kind of like having a little ecosystem right there in your bathroom, turning what we usually think of as waste into something beneficial.
That's crazy. So we're not just talking about saving water. We're talking about, like, Closing the loop, right? Turning a problem into a solution.
Exactly. And that's a big part of what we call circular sanitation. Instead of just flushing everything away and forgetting about it, these systems try to recover resources from human waste. It's about mimicking nature, where nothing goes to waste.
So instead of ending up in a landfill or polluting waterways, what we flush could actually come back around and benefit the environment.
Exactly. Imagine you could collect urine, treat it to remove any harmful stuff, and then use it as fertilizer. It's full of nitrogen and phosphorus, those essential nutrients that plants need to grow. And remember the compost from those composting toilets? That can also be used to enrich soil and grow food.
Okay, now we're talking. Not just solving the sanitation crisis, but creating a more sustainable food system at the same time. That's a pretty amazing connection.
It really is. It's all about seeing the potential in what we usually just throw away.
Yeah.
And that idea of resource recovery, it extends to wastewater treatment too.
Speaking of wastewater, I'm guessing treating it properly is super important to avoid contamination and protect public health, right?
Absolutely. But traditional wastewater treatment plants, they can be big energy guzzlers and expensive to run. The good news is that there are these new technologies that are making them more efficient and environmentally friendly.
Okay, you got to tell me more. What kind of technologies are we talking about here?
One that's really interesting is called anaerobic digestion. It uses microorganisms to break down organic waste, but it does it all without oxygen.
Anaerobic digestion. So no oxygen involved. What's the advantage of that?
Well, as part of the process, it produces biogas. And get this, we can use that biogas to generate electricity or heat.
Wait, are you saying we can turn sewage into energy?
You got it. It's a fantastic example of how we can move toward a more sustainable future, turning what we normally think of as waste into a valuable resource. It's like a sanitation superpower.
Seriously. That's mind-blowing. It's not just treating wastewater, it's actually generating energy from it.
Right. And it really highlights the potential of this circular economy approach to sanitation. Waste is an asset, not just a liability.
All of this sounds incredible, but let's be real. How much does all this cost? Are these cutting-edge technologies even affordable, especially in developing countries where the need is greatest?
That's a really important point. Implementing new technologies can be pricey, especially on a large scale. But there are definitely ways to make them more accessible. We can use things like microloans for communities or pay-as-you-go models. We can also promote local manufacturing, so we're building capacity and creating jobs at the same time.
So it's about finding creative solutions, both in terms of the tech itself and how we finance it.
Exactly. It's not just about having the technology. It's about making it affordable and accessible to those who need it the most.
But even with the best tech and the best financing, we need the right environment for these solutions to really take off.
You're absolutely right. That's where governments come in. We need clear regulations that encourage innovation, incentives to reward those coming up with new solutions, and investments in research and development to push this field forward.
So it's about creating this fertile ground where sanitation solutions can flourish. But honestly, hearing about all these advancements, it makes me feel optimistic. It is possible to solve this global sanitation crisis.
I agree. We've come a long way, and the future of sanitation is looking really bright, full of possibilities. It's a great time to be a part of this movement.
Well said. So to everyone listening out there, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, maybe even inspired you to take action. Remember, safely managed sanitation is about so much more than toilets and pipes. It's about dignity, health, opportunity, and ultimately creating a more sustainable future for everyone.
And remember, we all have a role to play in this. Whether it's raising awareness, supporting those innovative solutions, or advocating for change, we can all help create a world where everyone has access to this basic human right.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of safely managed sanitation. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged in making the world a better place.